Okay, Mike. I want to welcome everybody to the 4 o'clock work session of the Bowling Green Board of Commissioners for April 15th, 2014. We've got a few items on our work session agenda today, the first of which are proposed amendments to the Administrative Personnel Policy and Procedures Manual. Mr. DeFebo.
Thank you, Mayor. Today we're here to discuss changes that staff is requesting the Commission to ratify concerning our Personnel Policy and Procedural Manual. In essence, this policy manual represents our codified relationship with our employees, providing work rules as well as expectations, as well as the benefits that we provide in that relationship with our employees. This is a fluid document that gets changed and ratified by you every couple of years. Mike's here to tell you the process that we went through and to share with you some of the requests that we'd like to make. Mindful there may be other things that we need to investigate. So Mike Grubbs, our Human Resource Director and Risk Manager, is here. Michael?
Good afternoon.
Welcome, Mr.
I'm here to share with you the exciting world of personnel manuals. Ours is 85 pages long. My goal is to hit 100 by the time I retire. And at the rate we're going, might be this year.
Maybe.
This is, as the city manager said, a process that we go through continually. The last full revision was accomplished in late 2011, so it's been a couple of years in the works. Prior to that, the last manual complete revision was done in 2006. So pretty much as soon as one is done, various issues come up. We're always affected by changes in federal and state laws. Sometimes there are simply policy changes that we feel need to be made. Sometimes there's old language that needs to be deleted. A lot of it, though, comes from interpretation. It doesn't matter what your policy is like. You're always going to have questions come up. It can't possibly address every situation. So a lot of the changes that are presented to you are simply because a question has come up or an issue's come up regarding one of our policies, and someone has to make an interpretation. And then once we do that, we try to codify that in the manual to help address it the next time it comes up so that we're consistent. Again, a number of reasons for changes. Some are procedural. As an example, we have references throughout the manual to leave forms, and we have been transitioning to electronic time clock as well as electronic leave requests, so therefore some changes are simply to keep up with the times. I began working on the manual revision the latter part of 2012. Again, just kind of working on issues that had come up since the manual was revised a year earlier. I presented that to the city attorney and city clerk for review. They gave their comments, had other suggestions. Eventually worked that to our committee that we've used the last couple of times, which also includes the city manager and internal auditor. I reviewed those changes. Again, other items continue to come up. And then presented it to senior management in January. Again, a few more comments or suggestions. And we're now at the point of making some recommendations for you to review and hopefully fairly soon have them for a municipal order for adoption. I've given you a spreadsheet that lists the significant changes. There's about 40 on there. Categorizing about a quarter of them are really changes in our policy, either adding something, deleting something, or making an amendment. A quarter of them are codifying interpretations that have already been made regarding our policies. Several of them are just procedural changes, and then about half a dozen relate to impact of state or federal laws, and 5 or 6 are actually benefit enhancements or improvements. Some of those include we've allowed employees to carry over comp time up to a certain limit. At one time, we required employees to cash it out at the end of the quarter. Then we had some requests from some divisions where they did a lot of work in the summer and not so much in the winter. Could we be allowed to carry some of that over? So we made a change in the last manual to allow that to be carried over. Then we got the other complaint, well, I'd like to cash out some of mine at the end of the quarter. And that made sense because obviously the longer the employee carries it out, their pay goes up. So if we can cash it out sooner, might actually save the city some money. So this policy is a hybrid. Still allows them to carry over, but allows them also to cash out part of it at the end of each quarter. The Education Assistance Program, where we reimburse employees for tuition and books up to a certain dollar limit. In 2010, with our budget crisis, we put a severe limit on master's degrees, only allowing master's degrees for positions above a certain pay grade. We've always required that it be job related, obviously, and again, there's a limit on how much we reimburse. But we're proposing, again, at the request of some employees, to remove the pay grade requirement. All the other conditions remain the same. Another change that's a benefit is with our flexible spending account. Due to a change in IRS regulations, we're allowing employees now to carry over up to $500 a year in their flexible spending account from one year to the next. And one change I think that a lot of employees will appreciate is going from the term funeral leave to bereavement leave. Our policy is an employee gets 3 to 5 days depending on the type of relative, but it also depends on the date of death and the date of the funeral. And you can think of various examples where if the death is on a Friday and the funeral is on Monday, the employee might get 1 day. If the death is on Monday and the funeral is on Friday, they might get 5 days. So it's affected by those dates as well as the particular shift the employee works. With funeral leave, my interpretation is that means you get time off to plan for and go to the funeral. It doesn't mean you get time after that to deal with all the things that a family member might have to deal with after the funeral, because it's called funeral leave. So the change to bereavement leave will be more flexible. It means the employee can use that time to plan for the funeral, attend the funeral. If they have family matters afterwards they need to deal with, they can also do that. And of course, these days, many times there's a memorial service rather than a funeral, and it could be weeks or months later. And so each employee generally will get about the same amount of time depending on the death, rather than it depending on when the funeral occurs or when the death occurs. Then we also have a couple of major policy changes. One is, and again, I've identified those in the memo to you, reimbursement of training costs. We've had a policy for several years that a new police officer has to sign an agreement. If they leave within 3 years of completing the academy and go to work for another Kentucky law enforcement agency, they can be, well, actually the agency they go to would have to reimburse us for a portion of their training costs. We're actually proposing to change that policy that if the officer leaves to go to any job, or if they leave, period, they can be required to reimburse us for a prorated portion of their training. Understand this would not apply to any current employees. They're already under an agreement. This would apply to new officers hired after this policy were to go into effect. We also felt like, well, if we require that of police officers, what about everybody else? There are occasions where we might spend thousands of dollars to give another employee very valued, specialized training. We certainly don't want them to then turn around and leave the city and go to work somewhere else, and we've paid for that training. So the policy recommendation is if they leave within 12 months of completing that training, they could be required to reimburse us for a prorated amount of that training. There are a couple of exceptions. If someone retires, we would only go back 90 days as opposed to a year. If they retired on disability, we wouldn't require them to reimburse anything. And also if it's mandatory training. If a building inspector is required to go to X training each year in order to keep their certification, we would not expect them to reimburse us if they then left for some reason. So that's kind of the major change there. The other one has to do with maternity and paternity leave. We've had a maternity leave policy many years. I've been here 27 years and it predates me, that allowed a female employee up to 6 months of paid leave if they had the leave accrued to take off for maternity leave, and then sometime since then it was amended to include paternity leave. So potentially a male employee could take up to 6 months of sick leave because their wife had a baby. In looking at, since then, of course, the Family Medical Leave Act was adopted that gives certain protections to employees. It refers to 12 weeks of leave, not necessarily paid leave, but leave. And in looking with other public local employers as well as other cities, our current policy is far outside the standard. It's much more liberal, if you want to use that term. So what we're proposing is to basically follow the Family Medical Leave Act tenure and say, okay, we'll allow an employee up to 12 weeks for maternity or paternity leave. They can use whatever accrued leave they want to. If they're using sick leave, there's no medical certification required. If they have other vacation and personal leave that they want to use on top of the 12 weeks, they can request that, and if the department head approves it, that would be allowed. And if there are medical complications, then the employee could also apply to use additional sick leave beyond the 12 weeks, as long as they provide medical certification. So as not to impact anyone currently expecting a baby, we propose that this policy not go into effect until July 2015. So anyone currently expecting, the current policy would apply, so as not to surprise someone, or they've maybe already made plans for their absence. That is a summary of our major changes. I know it was a lot for you to look through since the agenda went out, the packet went out last Thursday. But if you have questions about particular items, I'd be glad to try to answer them, or at least take a note, research it for you. And then at the appropriate time, we would bring it back to you for approval.
Just to add to what Mike said, this document was developed with certain values on the city's part. Some of those values was to be fair to the employees and to be fair to the taxpayers, to try to always constantly balance the needs of both groups. So we are always asking the question, what is reasonable? And we feel many of these things in here are reasonable. In some environments, almost all of these would be negotiated, but here we have a system in which our employees work with us to accomplish this without the encumbrance of the other structure. So it's comforting if we follow the balance principle, which I think we have traditionally.
Yes, sir.
If we have a policeman that has already applied, let's say in this particular example, to the Kentucky State Police, he's hired here, and he leaves after 2 years or whatever, and he goes with state police, he's got to pay the city back for what now?
He would have to reimburse us for the training costs, which is basically the X number of weeks that they're at the academy, plus our direct costs for hiring and training that person. But then it's prorated. If he's here 2 years, then he would only have to reimburse us 1/3 of what that cost was. And that's our current policy, except that at the moment it's the agency that would have to pay us, and state police doesn't apply. They always exempt themselves. The state always exempts itself from laws it passes. But if, say, an officer went to work for Elizabethtown Police Department, after 2 years, they would have to reimburse us. Actually, that agency is supposed to reimburse us for the portion of training that's left if they want to hire him. But this policy would make it broader and say the employee would have to reimburse us if the agency doesn't. We're talking generally $25,000 as our cost to train a new officer. And that's just the time that they're in the academy. That doesn't count field training.
We currently have enforced this with a number of people, correct?
Yes. But it's more limited. It's really limited to those going to work for another law enforcement agency in Kentucky outside of state police. And this would expand it to pretty much any kind of employment.
And we had one about a year and a half ago. We moved to another Kentucky city. Apparently that city refused to pay, and they said, of course, our position was state law, you've got to. That individual officer paid it himself instead.
I'm sorry, state law. I'm sorry, Joe, were you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
State law requires the reimbursement?
If we have the agreements in place, and this statute basically puts the burden on the other city hiring, it's their obligation to reimburse. Just like, and I'll throw out one, if Russell had this program in place and we recruited one of their officers less than 3 years in, they would have the ability to come to the city of Bowling Green and say, if this officer comes to work for you, then we want you to prorate and pay us back whatever prorated percentage of his training costs back to us. So the statute only deals with the employing agency, not the individual, and again, it's for 3 years. But as Mike said, we can enforce it against state police. We can enforce it against federal hiring agencies. And we've had at least one, I think, one or two, who have left for police work in other states. So we can't make this applicable to other cities in Ohio or Indiana or Tennessee or any place else either. So it's a very, very limited statute in effect.
Are we the only one that has that statute?
No, I mean, it's it's a state statute. I don't know which other ones are actually enforcing it, but when we've been contacted by candidates from other cities who are already certified, that's our first question is, when is your 3 years up? And there was one candidate, I required him to provide documentation that he was not under a similar agreement.
You're confusing me with similar agreement.
He was applying from another city, and he was within the 3 years of having graduated from the academy. So I made him provide documentation from that city that he did not have an agreement with them for reimbursement of training, that we would not be under any obligation to pay.
I understand. So it's not just state law, it's whether or not this city
Right.
adopts this policy.
Right.
Yes.
State law gives the, okay,
Yeah,
now.
right. State law gives us the authority to do it, and then it's our choice whether we do it or not.
That's-
So every Kentucky city has not.
Okay.
That's what I was asking a while ago, if other cities.
Other comments or questions? I sent in a series of questions to you early on, and you clarified all of them, except I'm still confused on the Chapter 6-10 on the...
What page?
It's page 60.
The actual change, that has to do with the carry conceal. The actual change that we're making has to do with whether an employee can carry a gun in their vehicle on city property or in a city vehicle. And based on the state law that was changed a couple of years ago, we're striking the language that prohibits the employee from having a gun in a city vehicle or a personal vehicle, because the law seems to say we can't do that. The rest, the rest of it's covered by city ordinance as far as carry concealed in city buildings, but the only piece that we're changing in the policy manual has to do with the vehicle, and again, because of a change in the state law.
Okay, so we're prohibiting the prohibition.
Right.
Okay.
We're stopping the negative, something
We're,
like that.
we're removing a prohibition. We're not telling people they can do it, but we're not telling people they can't do it, because by state law we can no longer prohibit it.
And
But we're not advertising and say, go do this now.
But we're prohibiting carrying concealed, that state law says
You
they can
can.
carry it in the open.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Say that again.
State law says, although we can prohibit them from carrying a concealed weapon, we can't prohibit them from carrying it in the open,
Correct.
regardless of what city ordinance is on city property. That only applies to carry concealed.
Correct.
I'm trying to understand the logic behind that.
It's not, and it applies also only to buildings, not anything outside, not vehicles, but only to buildings, and only to those buildings that we have designated as non-concealed by putting the sign up on the door. So I think all of our city buildings probably do not have that prohibition either. But like this one, what Micah said, right now we have a policy that says that even if you have a concealed carry permit, you can carry a vehicle, a weapon on you in your postal card. But our policy right now says, even though you have a concealed carry permit, you cannot carry that weapon into a city vehicle. We think that's probably in violation of state law. That's the language we're removing. And again, like Mike said, we're not telling employees to go do it. We're not encouraging them to do it. But we don't think we have the authority that if somebody actually has a concealed carry permit, that we no longer have the authority to tell them they cannot carry that weapon in a city vehicle, as long as they have a concealed carry permit and it's concealed.
The mayor raises good issues, that there is a degree of confusion or about the application possibly of the law. With your courtesy, it might be possible if we could pass the policy and leave the section related to this in abeyance until we had a chance to respond thoughtfully and thoroughly to your questions and
Sure.
the questions you raise. We found some of the
Yeah,
response.
this came from Kentucky League of Cities,
Yes.
right? I
So
thought I'd read this
what we'd
before.
like to do is pass the policy, if you like, the rest of it, and just leave this as is, and we would move forward with a more comprehensive recommendation, discussion of the larger issues.
Is that the summary off KLC webpage?
Yes, that's what you gave me today. I think that'd be the best way to do it, because it's a thoughtful discussion. And there's state law, and there's Constitution, Second Amendment, and all these things.
And the end game, we can't do a whole lot. Like cable,
Well,
we
that's-
talked about in a
that's
few minutes,
kind
we
of
can't
what
do
I
a
was
whole
under-
lot.
All right.
Well, and I think our thinking is that we can't treat employees any differently than the general public. And the greater issue, is controlled also by city ordinance, not just the policy manual.
You raise good questions. We're just not prepared to answer
Oh, no,
all of them.
I don't understand, and I just
Is everybody okay
am
with that?
confused with
Okay.
what we're doing on that. All right, you answered all the other questions I had. Fine. Did anybody else have anything else on the personnel policy manual? All right, we'll set that aside.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Nice tie, by the way.
Thank you.
That's a rep tie. Repetition tie.
Next thing we have, I think, is what our visitors are here tonight to see the fruition of the hard work that they put together for us. So, Mr. Febo on our...
Mayor, if I could preamble this for the public, there's always a discussion in this community as well as any community that forms a city is what are the community standards for what is acceptable for how we maintain our property. We, based on a number of cases we had over the last couple of years, thought it was time for us to look at that question and asked our citizens what they in fact felt should be community standards for property maintenance. Brent put together a committee, and he'll talk about that, and to look at that very question. And we're here tonight. Brent is to sunshine the results of their work. This has already been sunshined and shared with the Code Enforcement Board, and we thought it would be important for you all to hear it. Brent?
Thank you. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
DeFebo, Mayor and Commissioners. As Mr. DeFebo was saying, this is really our local ordinance. You see in my memo, I talk about the nuisance ordinance. That's kind of how I commonly refer to it. This is where we are saying this is our minimum standard. And we have to apply that minimum standard all over Bowling Green. Every neighborhood, every area, that's what we're really establishing. You hear the term code. What's code, what's this? We have something for that. That's our International Property Maintenance Code, what we call the Purple Book. This is going to talk more about the existing buildings that are out there, the inside, how many smoke detectors do you have to have, how many, not how you build them, that's a different code book. This is once they're built. So we already have this. This isn't what we're changing. What we're really changing is Chapter 27 of our Code of Ordinances, and it's going to involve some other things, and we'll get into that at the end. So the process we went through was we identified what we thought were some issues that needed to be looked at. The other part of that was the General Assembly made some changes that we thought we needed to take advantage of. One of those was dealing with liens, and the other one dealing with mobile manufactured homes. And I'll talk about those as we kind of get through them. So those are the two main things that really said, okay, we need to do this using our experiences from other cases that we've had, other experiences that we've had in the community, and trying to apply the Chapter 27 nuisance ordinance. So what we did was we developed a 10-member citizen work group. This was a voluntary work group. Whenever you have a voluntary work group, you have voluntary return. But luckily, we did have some attendance regular enough that we were able to work through some of these issues. We also used a variety of staff input. So Karen Foley was part of this. Teddy Webb at the time was our code enforcement coordinator, so he was part of it. Mr. Harmon sat in on it, and I really was there to facilitate the conversation, to use the citizen input, the staff input, and just make sure that we had a conversation between all those parties. So we used our data, our previous experiences, and then also what is everybody else doing? Because most cities of any size have some type of nuisance code, some type of property code. So that's what we wanted to make sure that we were trying to see what else is going on there. And not just in Kentucky, not just looking at Louisville, Lexington, Owensboro, places like that, but really looking at Tennessee, Texas, Florida. what are some other places doing, that have already seen these issues. Because I believe that, in government, we all face a lot of the same issues. It just depends on how big they are sometimes.
Brent, I think you have some members of your citizens work group here. Would you introduce them for us?
Yes, I would be glad to. Mike Mosley with Pine Grove Homeowners Association, and Mr. and Miss Ramsey with
Cross Ridge.
Cross Ridge. I had Hunting Creek in my mind. I apologize. Cross Ridge. And then Karen's here, and we've also got some neighbors that wanted to come out and talk about code enforcement this evening. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. So to give the citizens an opportunity, we kind of gave them some homework assignments. We did this a couple of times. And we actually gave them a map of some neighborhoods in Bowling Green, put them out and said, okay, go look at these places. I have the theory that we kind of get in our own routine. We drive to work, we drive home, we drive to church, we drive to the grocery. We kind of follow our normal paths, and very rarely do we deviate from that. So there's certain times that you never go to parts of Bowling Green. So you never really see what's going on in those areas. So what we made them do was kind of go out into the neighborhoods, see what they see what the issues are. Because whenever I talked at the beginning about applying this to every neighborhood across Bowling Green, it's important to see what the variety of all those neighborhoods are. So that was part of this was putting them out, and then we also just started talking about it. We started at the beginning, worked our way through the end. Someone was naive enough to think that this could be done in 3 meetings. I'll go ahead and take the blame for that. So I thought we'd be done in June. I'd be presenting this last July. We finished in September, and it took another 4 months to finish up some of the other legal stuff. So that was my fault. But they were patient with me. I was patient with them, and as we worked through the process. And what this is tonight is really the consensus, the recommendations, the things that they could reach a decision on to bring forward to you all. But I'm also going to talk about the things that we discussed that we really couldn't reach that consensus on, that there could not be a recommendation for. Talk about data. They had asked for this first meeting, so I presented it to them. I think this is our 2012 data for violations. Grass and weeds, number 1, always is, but you got to understand that's mostly done in 6 months. Grass is just now starting to grow. It's usually done by the 1st of October. So our number 1 violation is only 6 months out of the year. The next 3, I kind of group together because they're just stuff. It just depends on what type of stuff they are. So it's refuse, garbage, rubbish, that type of stuff. That's going to be more household waste. Demolition, landscape debris, that's going to be where you've done something but you hadn't cleaned it up. And then you've got the junk scrap metal. So all that is just stuff outside in the yard. It just depends on what type of stuff it is. Then you get into furniture, motor vehicles. Protective coverings is really paint. Then you're getting into more structural issues. So we started looking at making sure that we understood, okay, where are we really spending our time? What are the things that we need to focus on where most of our violations are occurring? So now we'll get into the changes. Part of this and part of a goal that we've had in NCS for the last several years is trying to make things where anybody can understand them. We try to write things. We've redone our notice of violations. We've redone our citations. So if somebody's reading something, they can understand this. So we try to improve our flow, our communication to all people in the community. So what we did was we took all the definitions that were split up into about 3 or 4 different sections and just moved them all into one section. So everything's defined in one area. We added some new definitions. I don't believe we took any out. I think we just moved some and then added some. We also took out some difficult to interpret language, and you all should have a copy, a rough draft of the chapter 27, so you can see the strike through is where it came out, the underline is where it came in. Remove some of the difficult to interpret language in dangerous buildings. If you look at what it said before, you'd have to hang a plumb bob in the middle center of a wall to see how far out of plumb, if it was outside of the middle third, to determine if the building was dangerous. Well, I believe that I have the staff that's trained in building construction, building knowledge, and they can make that determination. We don't need to have to hang a plumb bob to determine how far out it is. So we wanted to take some of those things out. Another change, we didn't change the grass height. Everybody knows that's 10 inches. But what we did include in there was requiring it all the way to the street or to the curb. This has come up from time to time, but before it really just talked about the person's property. Someone was nice enough to send Mr. Harmon a bill one time for maintaining the right-of-way along the front of their property to the street. So we wanted to go ahead and make sure that that was clear in the ordinance, that we expect someone to mow from their property line all the way to the curb. That was included in here. Anytime you have any questions, just go ahead and stop me. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking. Added a purpose to the nuisance code. We really wanted to, say, why are we doing this? And if you read that, it really talks about, because we want to preserve our neighborhoods. You all value them. It is part of your top priorities, and we want to do this to preserve our neighborhoods. Another part of just communication, tires was included in junk and scrap metal. So we'd send out an NOV to somebody, and they'd say, I ain't got no junk metal out there. I just got tires. What are you doing sending me this? So we felt like, okay, we'll just go ahead and separate tires, make it its own thing, because you kind of have to deal with tires a little bit differently anyways. So make it its own thing. So we're not doing away with it. We just made it its own violation. Just make sure you're clear there.
NOV is notice of violation.
Yes, it is. Notice of violation. And that's really just where we've notified the property owner. We said, we believe that there's a violation. We want you to fix it. There's no fines, no fees, nothing attached to it. It could be a phone call, it could be a meeting, or it could be a letter. Most of the time the formal is the letter, but sometimes it's even just as easy as a phone call. One thing that we did talk quite a bit about is our compost bins. We believe that compost piles, like you see on the left, are a violation. To me, this is demo landscape debris. But what we were finding was people saying, oh, no, that's not a pile of limbs. That's a compost pile. I'm composting. So what we really set up was, okay, if you want to compost, that's fine. We'll let you compost. But it needs to be in a true compost bin. You can't just have a pile of debris out in your yard and calling that compost. So we talked about how big, how many, where at. So then you start getting into all these specifics, all these things that you have to start to define as you go through this. We stole some language from the solid waste ordinance where you can compost, but it has to come from your property. So you can't start your own kind of composting where you're bringing everything in from the neighborhood. So that's where you see some of that in there. Dilapidated structures, we really just added in some additional examples. And something else that was the big change here was the fences. We've seen fence repairs made out of anything you can think of. Pallets, scabs. Scabs are like whenever you go to the sawmill and whenever they try to square it up and they have the round part, that's called a scab. Where they just scab it up there. We've seen about everything. So what we really wanted to do was, okay, that fence was probably nice whenever it was built in 1978, but if it's bad, it needs to come down. Or if you want to fix it, it needs to be a wood fence just like it. So what you see here is a picture of the broken fence. You can see where one's been fixed of a similar material. I'll give you all the disclaimer that I gave on all mine. These pictures are not from Bowling Green. I take these from the internet, so this isn't anybody's house or backyard or anything. These are just examples that I pulled. So really what we were trying to do here was get to where this was the fix and not whatever else they found. Okay? Here's another big change. Previously, there's been no requirement for where you keep your trash containers as long as they're not on the right-of-way, as long as they're not on the sidewalk, things like that. This has been one of our top complaints, especially in and around campus, where people just leave their trash containers by the road all week long, and they take the trash from the kitchen to the road. They never move the trash can back to the house. I'm sure you all have gotten these complaints, and we say, I'm sorry, that's not a violation. Now, we're saying you can't do that anymore. The trash can has to go to the house, except trash day. It can't be any more than 5 feet away from the front corner of the house, except on trash day. And we've talked about this internally on how do we handle this. We think the best way is just complaint. If somebody, because we get these calls, we get these complaints, then we can see what is the trash day for that area and then work with the property owner to get that addressed. Otherwise, I think if we do it as part of our roaming, then our inspectors have to know every single trash day all over the city as opposed to just figuring it out once we have the case. So I wanted to let you all know that change. But this is completely new. This is all new, but this is something where we look at what complaints we received from the citizens and talked about it and came up with a recommendation. You can see the picture to the left has just the kind of trash cans hanging out front. Take the trash bag out there. Picture to the right is more of just trash day, what you're trying to get. And it's not just trash containers, it would also be the recycle containers since we have that service in this community.
This in and of itself will be worth the time that you all spent. Yeah. Like Brent said, the complaints about this is unbelievable.
So that is something that I want to make sure that you're aware of, that this would be a new violation. Motor vehicle parking in the yard. And I'll talk more about motor vehicle towards the end, because that's something that was a point of our conversation. Traditionally, we enforce this through the zoning ordinance. We no longer enforce the zoning ordinance, you're aware of that, but also in my interpretation of how the zoning ordinance was written, it was a development standard. It said, if you're going to put in a driveway, it has to be asphalt, paver, concrete, pervious asphalt, those types of things. I always viewed that as a development standard. It didn't say, don't park your car in the grass. It said, whenever you build your driveway, it has to be made out of these materials. So a lot of the change has come from me and my interpretation of how that was written. And now we no longer enforce the zoning ordinance, but I felt like it was important to our neighborhoods for us to say, you can't just park your car out in the yard. Now we understand that you should be able to, if you've got a load of mulch, drive your truck, trailer through the yard, undo your mulch, but you shouldn't just be able to park the 78 Scottsdale on the front yard and leave it out there. That's really what this is. So this would be a new violation under our Chapter 27. And what we're talking about here is motor vehicles. And I'll explain a little bit more about that at the end of why that is such a point of emphasis. But motor vehicles would be something that you're going to drive down the road. Cars, trucks, vans, RVs, things like that.
So is a citizen allowed to park their car on their property if they use pavers, for example? Because that's in current interpretation. You're saying this is a change?
No, pavers would be an acceptable. That would be an improved parking surface.
Okay. That still is required. You just can't stick it out in the grass somewhere.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. What we're really talking about is not parking in the yard. So you still have to park in the driveway, on the street, some type of an improved parking surface.
What about if just for a short period of time for like parties, you need extra parking? You're okay?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have some of these things come up. Our inspectors work 7:30 to 4:30. Most of those events are going to occur over the weekend. We're going to get the complaint on Monday. Hey, they parked out there Friday night. They had a party. We're going to get there Tuesday, and it's back to normal. So some of these things, we're just going to have to deal with. And really, what it comes down to is, did they correct the violation? So these are things. What we're really looking at is people that are just treating their front yard, their side yard, as a parking lot. Not, was there 2 tires in the grass? It's, are you treating your yard as a parking lot? And as you look through a lot of other communities, this is kind of like overgrown grass. You don't want people parking in the yard. Yes, sir.
If you're finished.
Oh, yes.
You just brought something to my attention. If you get off at 4:30, the guy comes home from work and parks in the yard every night. He gets up to go to work the next morning, so he's going to park in his yard every night, but he corrects a violation every morning when he leaves.
We have authorized overtime. Whenever we did the zoning ordinance, what we had was people running businesses where they would, be gone during the day, come home at night, and we didn't work. So we would send people out after hours to see, okay, are they really running a business? So if we get those things, we'll investigate them, we'll look at them, and we can flex our schedules however we need to. But, what I was talking about is more the once a year I'm having, the cookout or something like that. Instead, because the other part of, if you have the perpetual parker, you're going to start to see the evidence. You're going to see the ruts. You're going to see the grass dying, things like that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And this may be addressed somewhere else, and maybe probably needs to go to the police at some point, but what about people parking on sidewalks?
I would consider that more police.
That's a police issue.
Yeah. Doug back there might disagree with me, and he might be making faces at me. Oh, he left. It's even better. See, now, yeah, that's definitely police. That's all police. So he's not here to defend himself. But I would really, because then they're really on right of way. And it'd be no different than parking out, because they can only park for so long on the street, inoperable vehicles on the street, they'll tag them, tow them, things like that. So
I think we do have a section in Chapter 21 or 22, I think, prohibits parking on sidewalks.
There is.
So, does that answer your question? Enough?
Yeah, I just know where it's being done quite a bit. So.
Okay. Talked earlier about the KRS change. This gave us a little bit better ability to deal with mobile manufactured homes, to really just kind of spot one and say, fix it or get it out. So we really wanted to take advantage of that new KRS. So that's why this was incorporated in. I talked earlier about the tires being separated out on their own. It's really no change, it's just a reorganization. This is one that just came up more recently, dealing with abandoned property and abandoned structures. And that's what we defined here is they haven't had utilities for a period of time, and they're an attractant for some other type of nuisance. So that could be littering, debris, dumping, vermin, those types of things. Also, talking about them with unfinished building projects. Somebody starts a pool, somebody starts a basement, and they run out of money, there's a divorce, whatever. We just got this big hole in the ground. Things that you just don't want in your neighborhoods that could cause harm. So that's really what this came from. This came from a little bit later on, but I have made the committee aware of it so that I had their blessing moving forward with it. Something else, and Gene might add in here, what we did was took the enforcement proceedings out of 27 and several other chapters. So you're going to see pretty much 2 whole sections with strike through. Moving all of that to Chapter 2 so that everybody has the same enforcement proceedings, but that's going to affect about 6 other chapters of the ordinance. So whenever I said, we finished this in September, it's taken us several other months, that's the several other months. Is how does this affect Chapter 2, Chapter 6, Chapter 21, Chapter 22?
Trees, and what Brent said, when we first started doing this, we started on code enforcement. So we created the Code Enforcement Board in Chapter 2, but then we had code enforcement in Chapter 27. That's where we put the abatement proceedings. But then over the years, we've started moving more and more things into civil penalties. And when we did that, whatever chapter was in, we sat there and basically repeated the abatement proceedings all over again in each chapter. We thought this would be a good time now to go back in, move all those abatement language back to Chapter 2, right in front of the Code Enforcement Board, which should be, and eliminate all that other language in 6 or 7 other chapters. So when you get to this ordinance, it's going to be a pretty good sized ordinance, but a lot of it's just going to be moving, eliminating that language in 5, 6, 7 other chapters and putting it in one spot.
And what you have a copy of tonight, and what I'm really focusing in on, is the 27 part of it, the work group part of it. They weren't as concerned about the reorganization of Chapter 2 and Chapter 6 and things like that. They were more concerned on the violation aspect of it. So that's what the focus of it is tonight. I just want to make you aware of that. But what else will be in that enforcement proceedings, because it was in the section that we've moved over to Chapter 2, there was the other main driving force, is KRS 82720 gave lien priority to nuisance liens. And so that was part of this also was what is the nuisance? What else is nuisances? So not only is code enforcement could be considered a nuisance, animals can be considered a nuisance, trees can be considered nuisances, all these other things can be considered nuisances. And where we've been in the past is wherever we file is what order we're in. So we could run up fines, fees, per day fines, all these things, and then be 15th in line and never see anything. But what KRS 82720 allows us to do is go right behind taxes. To give us that opportunity to increase our collections. So this is not a revenue generator. I'm not trying to make this a revenue generator. I'm just trying to take advantage of the KRS that's out there. So that would be a part of this enforcement proceedings. The other change that state law allowed us to do is not have to send certified return receipt mail. Drop it back down to first class mail. So then that takes your mailing from $6 a letter to about 45 cents a letter. And whenever we're sending out citations and findings of facts and some of those things, it starts to add up pretty quickly. And I talked about the effects of several other ordinances already. I want to give you a little bit of history on this. These are our fines for code enforcement violations, structural and non-structural. Most of your structural is going to come out of the Purple Book. Non-structural is going to be your nuisance type things. Doing some historical research, we believe that the previous ones, the ones that we're currently operating under, were part of the creation of code enforcement in 2000. So they're about 14 years old. We thought whenever we were working through this that they were done in about 2006, so we thought they were about 8 years old. So whenever the committee looked at, well, what should these be, not only did we look at what other organizations doing, other jurisdictions doing, but if it's going to be another 8 years before these are changed, should these be relevant for another possibly 8 years? What they decided to do was pretty much double all the fines. first offense, second offense, third offense, and as you can see. Not as an attempt to increase fees, not as an attempt to just punish property owners, but to make them more current with the cost of things today and the cost of things into the future, with the understanding that it's been some time since they've been changed. So I wanted to bring those to your attention and give you a little bit more of the history and background on why those are what they are.
Can you explain why structural and non-structural are handled differently?
Why they're different? Structural would be more because usually they're more serious. If the grass is just overgrown, that generally doesn't affect someone's real well-being. Whenever you get into structural issues, then you're really talking about someone's living in this condition, so that's kind of a little bit more of that understanding.
Probably safety issues.
Yeah, then you're really dealing with safety issues.
Thank you.
Any other questions as it relates to these? What we found, I think what Katie found in one of our ordinance reviews, was if you go to Chapter 21 for obstructions on city property, it says, see Chapter 27 for fee structure. When you get to Chapter 27, there was no fees. So this isn't really more of a 27 thing. It is ending the link between 21 because to make sure that there are fees in there. So I had the committee go ahead and recommend some fees. They looked at other public works because this is really more of a public works violation. Looked at what their other fees are and tried to make them consistent with those. So this is really for violations in 21, but there were no fees listed in 27. So that's what that is. Repeat offender was something that came about a couple years ago as a way to look at properties that we've had issues with and try to increase our motivation efforts to see some type of change. As we looked at this and as we've kind of dealt with it for a couple years now, we started to look at this and say, okay, we think people should be able to come off of this. You shouldn't be on it forever. If you get tagged a repeat offender, you shouldn't be stuck like that forever. You should have the ability to be a repeat offender for a period of time. If you have other violations, if you have other citations while you're in that, you're going to pay more. But you should be able to kind of be on good behavior and come off of it. That was kind of our thought process in developing this. So what we came up with was whenever the Code Enforcement Board, who sits up there, will say, okay, this person is now a repeat offender, they set a time frame, 12 to 24 months. It's up to them, so it can be a year to 2 years. And really where that time frame comes from is that's how long it can take you to become a repeat offender. If you look at in Chapter 27, it's so many within 1 year, it's so many citations within 2 years. So we just kind of use that same timeline to say, okay, you're going to be on it, but then you're going to come off of it as long as you pay your fines. The other part of this is if we used citations 1 and 2 to deem you a repeat offender, we shouldn't be able to use 1 and 2 again to say you're a repeat offender. So we put that in there. So now you have to get new citations, new offenses to regain that status. So that's kind of where our thought process was with this. Since the committee recommended the fines go up, repeat offender fines are even more, now they've went up. So since everything doubled, those doubled too, that puts us at a minimum of a maximum of $1,200 up to $2,400 if they contest and come to the Code Enforcement Board. So I just wanted to make sure that you all were aware that that would increase also. Now, those are all the things that this group reached a decision or a consensus on to move forward with. Now it's time to talk about the things that we talked about but didn't really reach that type of decision. Trees and shrubbery. This is something that we deal with a lot. People say, well, those shrubs are overgrown. Well, what is overgrown for shrubs? Each species is different. Each variety is different. How big are they supposed to be? And that's what this committee said, you know what? We don't know which of these are overgrown. The other thing we deal with is trees. Well, that tree's dead. It's going to fall on my house. How do we know? How do we know where it's going to go? How do we know what it's going to do? What we try to deal with on our other nuisances is more fact-based, not assumption-based. And so what we really had a problem with was, where do you draw the line? And you'll see as I go through this, talk about the line. So where do you draw the line? Yes, this is probably ugly. But just because it's ugly doesn't mean it's a violation. And how do we define ugly? And we'll talk about that. Yard art. Oh, I know. Everybody loves the yard art.
No, it's define ugly.
Yeah,
Oh,
we were
you're going
talking-
to see ugly.
Well, we're looking for
Now,
a definition.
whose house did you pick out up here? I mean, before we get talking. So.
Yard art. This is one that really gets open-ended.
Can you make it bigger? Is that possible?
Now I got more pictures coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What you have there is just a simple fountain, still yard art. Now you kind of get into a whimsical little tree creature. See, it's fun. It's one thing. It's not that big of a deal. It's okay. Okay, so what about your Christmas decorations? That's yard art. What happens when it starts to be a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more?
This is all in our place?
No, this is all off the internet. I don't use pictures from
It
Bowling
could
Green.
be in our place.
It very well could be. Some people in this room could probably think of addresses for this stuff.
And it
Please don't
has.
say them out loud. But what we came up with was, where is the line? Where do you say, this is okay, this is not? How do you define that so you can apply it in every neighborhood, every subdivision, every part of Bowling Green? That's really the difficulty in this, is where is that line?
Did your group find that good taste is variable?
Yes, very much so.
And that it's
Because-
not legislative or a violation just because one neighbor might find it poor taste versus another?
Yes, and that was really part of the conversation that we went through, and I've got another couple of examples about that.
Where is the line in those pictures?
I could ask each of you, and you might have a different idea of where that line is. But we as the city have to say, this is our line, and this is the line that we have set. And how do we say that whenever there is no line here?
Glad you're learning, Brad. Good man.
I mean, it's just like some people like certain types of art, while other people don't care for that. Some people like still lifes or landscapes, and other people like modern art.
It's all
It's
taste.
hard to find that happy medium, and certainly to legislate.
It's not only the substance, but sometimes it's the length of time. I'm on a listserv and had one came across a few months ago, and I forgot what city it was, not in Kentucky, but people complained somebody had like a 20-foot blown up Santa, but they kept it out all year. And neighbors were complaining that, Christmas is over, put it up. But same question, what do? He kept it out year round.
Did you consider, I think in the sign ordinance, there's a percentage of coverage.
Yeah.
Was that?
There's a percentage of coverage in the zoning ordinance. I'm trying to think about in the sign stuff, because it's more dealing with overall size restriction. You're talking about building coverage.
You can't have more than 10% of the
On the
side
building.
of face.
What happens whenever when it's out in the yard, though?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, because that's kind of what we have on signs is, you can only cover up 10% of the building, but on the, in the lot, you can permit however many you want to pay for. So this is really the difficulty is where is that line? Because we might all agree everything on the right might be a little bit uglier than everything on the left. That's just what we agree on. That doesn't mean that somebody else is going to agree to that same thing too.
I think they all are cute.
I thought you might say that. The other thing not recommended for change, these were two staff items that they said no to. One was a pond exemption for stagnant water. They said no, even though they didn't feel like it applied, still wanted to leave that open-ended. And also the allowance of car covers for motor vehicles, inoperable, things like that. Kind of hide them underneath the car cover. They said no. If it's an inoperable, if it's a junk motor vehicle, you shouldn't have it. We're living in an urban environment. Another thing that we talked quite a bit about is commercial vehicles. And this is something that comes up especially in some of our newer neighborhoods where they have driveways that are about as big as this little area right here, and they drive their work vehicle home, a semi-truck home, things like that. Should you allow commercial vehicles in residential areas? So then it comes down to, okay, what else is a commercial vehicle? So you see the construction truck up here. That's just a regular pickup truck, but now it's a commercial vehicle because it's a business truck. And then you've got a little bit bigger truck. You've got a semi, you've got a bus, you've got a dump truck. can you say, no, you can't do these, or where do you draw the line on that you can or you cannot? Because there has to be a line in there. To give you an example, to give you a little bit of history on this center picture, this is out of Georgia. And this is a gentleman who fought the city who said you can't, who talked about the same thing, the commercial vehicles in residential areas, and he wanted to be able to drive his semi-truck, just the truck, home. And this is actually from their newspaper where he had won. They decided not to pass it. So these are things that we talked about, because I know you all have gotten the calls too about they park a semi-cab in the driveway. Should they be able to do that? Should they not be able to do that? Now, I think we've changed some things on parking on the road. Once it gets to their private property, should they be able to park their semi-cab in their driveway? And once we open it up to commercial vehicles, we start to see there's a lot of broad definition on commercial vehicles.
So was he allowed to continue to park?
He was.
What's our policy now?
As long, what they will be, as long as they're in the driveway.
So a person can park
The bus, the semi, the
bus
dump truck,
and
the dually, the truck, yes. These aren't recommended for change. So,
but you're not allowed to have a commercial business in a residential neighborhood, are you?
that's the business. That doesn't mean that you can't drive your truck home.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's the business.
Okay.
Be the same as, I don't have a city vehicle, but if I had a city vehicle, that becomes a commercial vehicle. Or I own BC Electric. I'm now an electrician.
Right.
I drive my truck home. I could be able to drive my truck home just like, I think it's Above It All construction up here, park it in my driveway. But my business can't be there. My business would be wherever it's located, but I could still drive my vehicle.
This guy violated parking in the yard too, didn't he? In the middle?
Yeah, in this picture it does look like that. So that's really not what the example was for, but thank you.
But the commercial vehicles, you're saying, do have to be parked in the driveway?
Yeah, all motor vehicles would have to be parked in the driveway. But the question was really, should we allow them in our neighborhoods? And there was a lot of debate on that.
What about the school bus? It's okay like it is?
Yep, as long as it's in the driveway.
And we see a lot of that in our city. They don't have no other place to park it. They got to pick the kids up and they got to park it somewhere.
Yeah. Now, I talked earlier about, whenever I was talking about parking in the yard, motor vehicles. And the way we defined motor vehicles was something that you drove down the road. You drive a truck, you drive a car, you drive a motorcycle, you drive a van, you drive an RV. Now, what we call vehicles, you don't drive. Generally, you pull. You pull a trailer, you pull a boat, you pull a camper, you pull a Sea-Doo, those types of things. So these are what we're calling vehicles. So the conversation was, okay, everybody was pretty good on motor vehicles should not be parked in the yard. That one we came to really easy. Once it came to should vehicles, using the understanding that these are vehicles, be allowed to be parked in the yard, that took 3 meetings. And what we came up with was really no decision. And they felt like that since they couldn't reach a decision, a consensus, that they couldn't bring it to you as a recommendation. So this is what it came down to was, okay, you got to park your car or your truck in the driveway, but should you also have to park your boat and your utility trailer? And then we start talking, okay, well, what if it's a 10-foot John boat versus a 40-foot sailboat versus a 60-foot tandem axle dolly down trailer versus a 10-foot utility trailer that haul mulching? You know, how do you start deciding where that line is? Because I used, before, where do you draw the line on what can and can't be? And this group couldn't determine where that line should be. So right now, in the way it's written and the way that we've used it in the past, if you had the utility trailer, that could be parked back there. You had the boat, that could be parked back there in the yard, but not motor vehicles. I want to make sure you all understand that.
Do some neighborhoods have their own rules, regulations?
Yes.
So in some neighborhoods, this is not possible. Is that correct?
Correct. The city doesn't enforce those.
Okay.
That would be up to the own neighborhood association
Okay.
to enforce that. The city doesn't enforce that. And that was part of the conversation that came up was, if you value that type of restriction, we have neighborhoods in this community that provide that type of restriction. But the question is, should this be the minimum standard for the entire city of Bowling Green? And that's when you start deciding, okay, is it right, is it not? This was by far the most talked about. Should vehicles or just motor vehicles? The other one, neighborhood standards, and this is one that we see quite often. You've got a nice street here. Everything's mowed, everything's cut down. You know, not a lot of hedges, not a lot of big bushes or anything. All the houses look very nice. And then you got one house that the bushes are overgrown. You see some ivy growing up on the porch. These aren't violations because they're trees, shrubbery, things like that. But it doesn't fit in with the other houses. Or maybe they used the yard art example. And
Those headstones.
yes, those are headstones. Or some semblance of headstones. And, you know, maybe it's not a violation in its truest sense, but it doesn't fit in with everything else. It just doesn't look right. It's the apple in the peach basket type thing. Should that be a violation?
What happens if the house is abandoned?
Abandoned, now we have some language in there to deal with truly abandoned. I want you to understand that abandoned, vacant doesn't mean abandoned. Abandoned means abandoned. You know, those are kind of two different things. A house can be vacant, a house can be empty. That's fine. Abandoned is really, there is nobody. And we have abandoned property in this town.
I mean, that we deal with. One Gene we talked about a number of times with a small house.
Right. That I would consider abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is vacant, but it's also abandoned. Yeah. But what we're really talking about here is just doesn't look right compared to everything else. But there's nothing wrong with it in the truest sense of the violation. It just doesn't fit in. So how do you say, okay, you can do that here, but you can't do that here. Here's the standard in this neighborhood. Here's the standard in this neighborhood. And how do you define what that standard is? And this one, you know, they said, you know, you can't do that. The city can't say this is where that is based on everything else, based on the other appearances. That's the end. I'll entertain any questions, comments. As I introduced before, we do have some members of the Citizen Committee if you want to ask them any questions and dealing with me and their patience with me. Karen's here. She was also part of it. So,
Any comments or questions from this end? Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. I want to thank the committee. Thank you all. You all have taken a lot of headaches away from us by this, but I do see some things, and I just need to know where we need to go, that still is not addressing a lot of the issues we have, and it's kind of on that last slide. We get calls from neighbors, citizens all the time about certain houses, and they are an eyesore, and it's disturbing to the neighbors and everyone in that community. So basically now there's still nothing we can do about it.
that's kind of what we came up with. Is how do you say this is the violation? Well, you know, and that's what we have to be able to say is this is your violation. This is what you have to fix. And how do you define, you know, what that it is? And then it's interesting. Rick, did you have something?
I'm with Melinda. It's so difficult when people call and, you know, you're just glad you're not the one living there.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. You know, they've got a well-kept house in a well-kept neighborhood, and you've got one neighbor that just simply, obviously doesn't care. And that's bad.
To get to the question I think everybody's asking, can you look at 27.6-1, 2, and 3? There it seems to raise the question that no one should maintain a property that Rick and Melinda are talking about if it hurts the values of other people. But then we say that there is no legislation of good taste. How does these two jive? 27.6, 1, 2, and 3. Can you maybe speak to that, Brent?
Oh, okay.
Please.
Yeah, without that in front of me.
You want to see it?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Well, I thought you knew all this.
Yeah,
You don't have all this
just an entire
memorized?
chapter, no big deal.
All right. Because on one hand, it says, we don't want nuisance, right? We can't
Right.
legislate taste. That's one. But on the other hand, we say people have a responsibility not to abridge the values of other people in their neighborhood. How do you reconcile the two?
Well, the difficulty is, how do we say that this is diminishing the property value? That's, the real difficult part is we have to be able to say, nope, you're doing it. I found that working for the city, anytime you do a sidewalk or a project or anything, everyone turns into a real estate appraiser very quickly. It's either going to help or hurt instantly. So whenever we do code enforcement, we face the same thing. People turn into real estate appraisers. And so then the city has to take the position that, yes, you are hurting the values of all the properties in this neighborhood, and saying that what you're doing is diminishing that. And I don't feel that my staff has the expertise to make that type of determination. I'm fine in my staff making the determination, is a house unsafe? Should people continue to live here? Are there other types of violations that need to be dealt with? Is electrical up to standard? I have faith in my staff to make those types of determinations. Whenever you get into these kind of arbitrary definitions or ambiguous definitions of what is the nuisance, what is the violation, there is no clear line. We went through the process with the citizens to try to define what is that line. And then that's what we always face is, the line's not always where we want it to be sometimes.
Should we take that out? Because it
Well, we
gives-
did reword some of that.
It gives people the impression that we're going to enforce this diminution of property values
Well,
without a standard.
we made that part of the purpose and changed that to could affect neighboring property values. And also, so it wasn't much of a violation as much of, we want to try to protect property values in our neighborhoods. We want to make sure people are responsible. And if you own property in this community, you are responsible for that property. You're responsible for the maintenance of it, you're responsible for the upkeep of it, and you're responsible for the liability of it. So, part of what you talked about is of the holding the property owner responsible, and we believe that is still the case. It is the property owner's responsibility for dealing with those.
Isn't this even more compounded by the fact of the increased number of rental properties we're getting in neighborhoods that traditionally, in years past, would not have had that issue?
Yeah.
So this problem is only going to become more significant,
Right.
as more houses become rental.
And, we're seeing that spread move further and further east. Latest estimates were up to about 63, 64% rental. So we're going to continue to see this, especially in more of our established homeowner neighborhoods. That's where the issue really starts to become more apparent. Where it's been kind of a rental area for 15, 20 years, we don't tend to see the issues pop up because people are used to some of the things there. But whenever it's the new thing in the neighborhood, then there's a lot of attention on it.
From a legal standpoint, if a property owner could prove somehow that their property values were being diminished by a neighbor's action, Gene, would they have recourse through the courts?
I think a couple things. They probably have some private recourse in the courts, and probably recourse through this as well too. But I'll kind of repeat what Brent said. It's defining a nuisance. That's kind of a common, typical definition of nuisance, like everywhere what we have here. Actually going out and making it applicable in the field is not that easy. The question is, how far do you go? And without giving an address, one of the ones we've dealt with the most the last few years was a couple of years ago. There's a house 2 or 3 away that probably sold, I think, for just barely under what they asked. And we were trying to make that point, that argument, well, you're diminishing the value of the property in the neighborhood, yet a house 2 or 3 houses away sold in not a real long period of time, pretty close to what they were asking for, which kind of knocked it down, the idea where you're dividing a property in the neighborhood, because that house wasn't impacted, if at all, very, very little, or again, if at all. But property owners always have their own personal rights in court too. There are state, common law state nuisance, I guess claims that people do themselves. The issue is most people don't want to have to hire an attorney and sue their neighbor. That's we've got code enforcement, and I think everybody would prefer the city do it itself. But as Brent says, it's always easier, of course, when you got peeling paint and gutters hanging down and tall grass and weeds. Those things you can look at and everybody can say those got to be corrected. It's another one when you've got, particularly the yard art things that, the neighbor, you're right, I wouldn't want to live next door to them either. But at the same time, we've got to figure out, one, we've got to prevail for the code enforcement board. Two, if we appeal, we've got to be able to prevail in the courts beyond that too. And it's, I'm not sure I can give you a good answer, but it's, there are both causes of action, either by this, certainly if they can prove, which would be difficult to do, but if they can prove, get some expert to come in and say that I've now appraised the houses 8 houses away, and then it's my determined accumulation because of that house right here, the value of your house has been decreased $10,000. We can probably take something like that and run. The issue is finding somebody who's going to come in and say that.
Or should the city take that responsibility to
I think
appraise
we
all the
need to
neighboring properties?
take this out or modify it personally, because I'll read it to you. No person owning, leasing, occupying, or having charge of any property or premise shall maintain or keep any nuisance thereon, nor shall any such person keep or maintain such property or premises in a manner which could cause substantial diminution in the value of other properties in the neighborhood. I mean, that's a blanket gray clause. I mean, what does that mean in terms of enforcement?
We're still going
Unless
through,
we're going to leave it in there as a undefined enforceable clause.
We're still going through and finding little things. Like I realized yesterday that we did not define motor vehicle, even though we had our own working definition for parking in the yards. We didn't actually define motor vehicle. So I went back and put that in there. So there are some little nuance changes, and so there's still opportunity. Nothing's on the agenda tonight. Today was really just to kind of bring it to you all to get some feedback, and then we can go back among staff and work through things before we bring the full ordinance to you.
Once again, I think you all did a great job, and I'm just looking at what can we as a commission do to help our citizens that do have that neighbor that is a nuisance. How can we define it? I would not want to live by that house, and I would say the majority of our citizens would be that way. So thank you. What can we do to protect those citizens? Be it a rental house, whatever it is, what can we do legally? Because it's only going to get worse, as you said.
And I'll let Brent jump in too. To me, I think there's two issues. One, those people who refuse to do anything are doing this intentionally. And two, those who don't have the money and unable to take care of their properties. I think if you have, I'm not sure we got a program, but it'd be nice if we had a program to financially help those who are unable.
We do have
by
a
age
program
or
for people.
For some, but not a lot of
It's a
cleanup
matter
stuff.
of taste.
Yeah.
This issue hasn't changed in the year we've dealt with it. A year ago, we were here about what is tasteful. We have a number of residents saying, my house is tasteful. Other residents in this maybe same neighborhood or different neighborhoods saying, that is not tasteful. Do something about it. Are we the enforcer of taste?
If that neighborhood is not complaining of this house, and if that's not a problem, that's okay. But what about this neighborhood who is complaining and they're constantly complaining? Can't we have some recourse to help those citizens of that neighborhood?
Ours has been going on for 3 years.
See, that's not right.
What did the committee come up with in terms of the answer to that question?
That there is no answer.
Oh. Okay.
That how does the city say that this is right, this is wrong across all neighborhoods to make that determination?
Karen Foley, Neighborhood Services Coordinator. In talking with the neighbors, the trouble is in articulating the language. It's not necessarily can we draw the line, although that's part of the conversation, because we can all take a vote and say this is in, this is out. But the problem is, how do you articulate something that is so subjective by its nature? I mean, even among neighbors, they could all agree amongst themselves that they all think X, Y, or Z is too much, or it's ugly, or it's not rising to the standard everyone else has. They can do that amongst themselves and come to an agreement. But how does city staff articulate for any possible scenario where that could be the issue, kind of the one of these things is not like the other phrase? Because in some neighborhoods, the outlier could be the person that could be someone that Operation Pride would give an award to. Their property is so outstanding, it's completely beyond the standard of the other homes in the neighborhood. So when you start trying to write actual language that someone's going to have to go enforce, it's very hard. You're just grasping, trying to lay hands on something that is very vaporous in nature. And I think that's what we were struggling with we don't even know where to start to write, because it has to be something you can capture in words. It can't be something that you just look at a picture and we can all go thumbs up or thumbs down. And I know because I hear from the exact same folks that you're talking to, and it is very frustrating to understand that what they're looking at is ugly. It's an eyesore. The neighbors are upset about it. They wish the conditions were different. And sometimes it's not even something you can look at. Sometimes it's that particular neighbor is ornery and hateful and cussing at people across the street. Even in a disorderly conduct, you have to be able to pinpoint a specific behavior and describe the behavior to charge with. And that's just that we struggled with in looking at standards. We could all recognize the issue and we could all recognize, hey, this is a problem and we wish this wasn't happening. What we couldn't come up with are how do we put this in words? And that's what we really just struggled with. I mean, we all recognize it's a problem, but we just couldn't articulate it.
Before you go there, did none of the other communities whose ordinances you reviewed had any options in that area?
I don't recall seeing any. Mike, you looked at 40 cities.
Yes, sir.
What we've done, from my observation, maybe yours too, is this community standard. We have held the Code Enforcement Board up as the arbiter of that. In that one profile case, the complaint was brought before the Code Enforcement Board. They were asked a question essentially under 27.60203, is this against neighborhood standards? And the determination was it was, and that people had to make changes. There was a prescription about how many things had to be changed to comply with the Code Enforcement Board. So they serve as the arbiter of what is tasteful. I think what Brent and the committee is saying, they can't legislate that. Somebody has to sit as a community juror, so to speak, and determine whether or not this is against community values. And I think our Code Enforcement Board does that, or at least has traditionally done that. Now, the opposite side of some of these high-profile cases, people come to us on the reciprocal and say that they're being persecuted because they're different. I've heard that personally. They say they're being persecuted by people. Part of this whole exercise to see if there was an alternative to the Code Enforcement Board being the arbiter, and it appears there is not in some of these taste questions.
Well, we have some issues too with some of our international citizens.
Yes.
That have a different viewpoint as those of us who may have grown up here. A grass front yard may not be important to somebody from another country, and maybe they have dirt. So I can see where that could be an issue. But it sure would be nice to be able to help these folks out that have invested a lot of money in their property and worked hard all their lives to have a nice place to live, and their next door neighbor is just making it bad.
Kevin, what is the provision currently, or whomever, to get the house that everyone knows or believes that is not a very good taste? What's the provision to get that in front of the Code Enforcement Board?
It's already been in front of the Code Enforcement Board.
No, I mean not specifically that one, but any of them. We have to keep the words in this chapter. I'm asking a question. Do we have to keep the words in the chapter where something is more broad so that we can get it to the Code Enforcement Board? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, I'm thinking, I'm raising the hypothetical.
in an absence of defining what is taste, we have to make it as broad as possible and make the code enforcement the community arbiter of what is a violation of community values and neighborhood values.
And how does that work with staff trying to make that determination? Is it someone who complains so much that we finally do something? But what allows staff to make that determination?
In the one test case, where we did that a couple of years ago, we did use one of the sections that Mr. DeFebo was talking about. That was another, I mean, I don't know how long that specific situation has been going on for some time.
Forever.
I can't recall what was the final decision. I don't think I was at the city very long then, so I don't know that I was part of that. I don't think I was in this role at that time, so I can't.
The decision was that this person had to affect certain changes in their yard, affect certain ways of decorating their yard. But in the end, that person felt persecuted and the neighbors weren't happy. But the code enforcement board acted and gave a prescription of what they determined to be what needed to be done.
And what they gave was a separate standard from anything else that we have in any of our other ordinances. They gave a specific standard to that one individual property that did not apply to or was not a basis from any of the other ordinances that we deal with. So that one specific one does have its own code enforcement order out there, board order out there.
I think the other thing that did factor into that test case was that there was a history of repeated complaints. Inspectors had been out there a number of times, and maybe sometimes they would find something, maybe sometimes they would find nothing. So I think that frequency and that repetition over time was also part of the case, because it wasn't just, it was one complaint and they went out and found something. It was a series of complaints with different complainants over time, and that kind of factored into
I think that
what was considered
that addresses my question. Does it take one complaint or 15 complaints before staff would feel comfortable in bringing that forward?
Well, I think staff would feel more comfortable with something that told us what that level is. And otherwise, we're making that determination independently on where that threshold is.
I think it comes before the code enforcement board when staff, after preponderance of trying to use the dictates of the ordinance, feels it can't define community standards of taste and brings it to the code enforcement board. That's what happened in the one example. So,
Anyone else?
Well, that test case deal feels the same way, as you said.
the person feels aggrieved that she's being, or he's being persecuted.
Based on a call
Yeah,
2 weeks ago.
I get that call probably every 6 weeks, so do many of you. So I don't know if there's a perfect answer. Maybe we need to leave this in here and let the work on the edges, try to define the grass and the tires and the vehicles. That's clear. But when it comes to like taste, that's a tough one.
Can't the neighborhoods be the taste level? If I'm living in a neighborhood and I'm in my front yard and I have all of these things that are overgrown,
Right.
and my neighbors all around me have perfectly manicured yards, to me that should point out to me I'm out of compliance with my neighborhood.
You are.
I am.
Now, the enforcement gets down to who enforces that.
So why can't we why can't citizens
Because then the
look?
city is bringing charges against the property owner. That's what we're really talking about. If your neighborhood wants to say, you know what, we want 6-inch grass height, manicured this, manicured that, that's fine. They can go forth and do that and take advantage of that. It really comes down to what does the city say that it is. And so if we say, okay, going back to my analogy of the apple in the peach basket, well, you're definitely the apple because your grass is at 8 inches, or you don't have Kimlawn come out and spray your yard, your bushes are a little bit overgrown, and all your neighbors do. The city is bringing those fines, fees, citations not the neighborhood.
But
So
the
it's
city
really
would-
us as an organization saying, you are violating this ordinance because you don't look like your neighbors.
But the city wouldn't go to that home if neighbors and citizens had not complained to us or to you all. It's not that we're out there pointing, oh, your grass isn't the same height. The citizens have complained, and I think we should help our citizens.
And I understand we all want to provide for our citizenry. I do. But this is where it really gets difficult, and as Karen said, write that out to where it applies in every neighborhood, every area, every portion of Bowling Green. And that's what this committee said, we can't write this out.
For example, I have 2 flower pots on my porch. Now, what happens if there was 14 on my porch and had no flowers in it? Would that be a violation of some law in this ordinance? That's a specific complaint. So what do we say to that man? Do we say, sir, you should have 2 pots like Kevin DeFebo? He'll say, well, I like 14. Is 14 against the law? Well, yeah. Why? Because the rest of your neighbors all have 2. Is that what we're saying to people? That was the whole purpose of this committee, to try to answer these hard questions. And after a year of work, they came up to the same thing, that we're going to have to evidently use the Code Enforcement Board to be the arbiter of community standards.
What we're really talking about is, the less than 1% of what we deal with. The things that we could define were the 95% of what we deal with. Right. To really try to do something in the neighborhoods. What we're talking about is a handful of properties somewhere in that neighborhood. I wish I had a better answer for you. I wish I had the magic thing and said, here, I've solved the issue.
I realize it's difficult, if not impossible, but we just need to make sure that there's some end point. There's somewhere that these people can go for final resolution.
I think the Code Enforcement Board has to be that arbiter, and it has to determine what level of response they expect from the person they're citing. That's what happened in the one test case. This process did produce, I think, some low-hanging fruit, which was good, but it still didn't answer that community taste question.
And nor did we find, as going back to the mayor's question, the community that had figured that out. And we found some that have really strict minimum standards. But they've, some of those are more planned communities where they were developed,
through the covenants of the titles or deeds, right? Deed covenants.
So you found where you can really over-strict some of these specific things to deal with some of that, but that comes down to what you're comfortable.
I remember living in one community in which you could not, according to covenant restrictions, put up a clothesline in your backyard. We moved there, and my wife said, we can't put a clothesline up. Really? No. So that's how strict some places are.
Jefferson County, several years ago, had, and I don't know whether it was through their planning and zoning and so on, pickup trucks couldn't be parked to the front of a house in a particular subdivision and so on.
Well, I appreciate all the hard work. The committee, if they spent a year arguing about the same things we've done over the last hour or so, I'd be having my hats off to you. Thank you for taking the time to think that your community is worth that effort. So we appreciate that. Any other comments, questions?
Mayor, can I,
I'm sorry.
Commission,
Yes, sir.
can I add one
hang
item?
on just a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come right on up, sir. Make sure we get your name and address for the record.
What?
See if we can get your name and address so the clerk can write down who was here talking.
Last name's Arnold. Donnie Max Arnold. 35 years ago, It's my problem. We moved in this house in Crestmore 35 years ago. At the time, we thought it was the most beautiful subdivision in Bowling Green. But the last 3 years, it's turned into rental property. This is our problem. And the people renting there just, you won't believe. I've written a book on it. But here's where I believe the landlord is responsible. If anything, sue them. What's wrong with suing them? But the problem just grows and grows. I've written a book on it. They hadn't mowed the grass this year. The backyard, they can't mow it. There's too much junk. Their lawnmower sitting in the driveway with 2 flat tires. The push mower sitting out front. It's been there all winter. 2 recycles being stacked by the front door. They don't even use them. 2 large garbage containers. And one of them stays at the street all the time.
One in the driveway.
There's an abandoned vehicle in the drive. And by the garage doors, there's so much clutter they can't open the garage doors. It's a family of, well, they inherited this from a grandpa, and it's a mother and 2 kids. They're teenagers, just out of high school. But they don't attempt to do nothing. But we know the landowner. I believe here's where the property owner is responsible. And we don't know where to go from here.
And
Mr.
Childers has that address and going to have his people take a look at it this week, isn't he?
Now, the garbage can can't sit out front anymore, right? Pursuant to this recommendation?
Once this is changed.
Okay.
One sits at the street, commercial, the old blue commercial garbage can. One's at the driveway, right after a walk.
I've told you guys too, there's a health issue in this house. There's 4 dogs in this house. You turn them out, one crawls under, gets in our yard, and one's got mange. He lays there and scratches till they let him back in the house. She works in a cafeteria. One of the boys works at Kroger in the meat department, living in this house. I'm sorry, I get emotional.
I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. I know Mr. Childers will have code enforcement look at what we can do under the current ordinance, and then when we pass the new one, we'll address the other issues that we can with it.
Well, we tried all last year. We called, and I talked to Karen Foley, and nothing was ever done about it.
But I turned it in one time, and myself, I think, and we got got a little bit done. Again, sometimes we got to push a little harder. I think we're hearing you.
Nice to them. We don't want no hard feelings. I mean, I'm a Christian person, and I try to be nice to them. But we're getting old, and if we were to sell our place, we couldn't get out of it what it's worth or what's next door.
Maybe this is the case, Brent, for
And those boys come in, they're big overgrown boys. They come in, and because he's outside working, they won't even acknowledge him. They go in and get a basketball and come out back and start playing ball when they need to be working.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll take a look at it.
Something if you can.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Febo,
Oh,
I think
thank
you
you,
want to
Mayor.
add one item to the
Yeah, I'd like to
agenda.
add item to our discussion. As we all know, we received notice from Comcast talking about agreement between themselves and Time Warner, and pursuant to our franchise agreement, we have to either approve or not approve that. And you also know that we sit with the county as a dual franchisor
and we need to talk about whether we want to do anything about this request, whether we want to seek outside counsel, which isn't necessary, but we could. I think we sit in a special position. Rick, if I could mention your name, have personal experience in this, so that's kind of helpful to us. I thought it was important for us to chat about it and see where we're going to go, if anywhere, with it.
Yes, sir.
I guess we're opening up to you all.
Well, and make sure everybody understands the actual transfer has not been approved by the feds yet. I think last I heard it's still before the FCC. This one may be an interesting transfer before the feds because I think there's going to be some opposition with some concerns about what kind of monopoly is going to be taking place on cable once this is done. Will it pass through Congress? Probably, but it may be a little bit more interesting hearings than some we've seen in the past. And, we'll see where it goes. But in the last few days, we have gotten a letter from Comcast that informed us that they are going to use one of their subsidiaries to merge with Time Warner. I think Time Warner, well, I think the way I understand it, Time Warner will still be our named cable company once this is done, but it will actually be owned by Comcast. Coincidentally, our franchise agreement also ends at the end of this year. A couple years ago, we extended it for a couple of years because we were, at that time, we were doing the transfer from Insight to Time Warner, and now we're coming about the same time with another transfer. We're going to run out of transfers for long. There's not any companies left. We're down
They'll just create another one.
Probably. So we got a couple of issues in the next few months that we're going to be looking at. As Kevin said, we've got 120 days from the day of their letter to approve the transfer. If we don't do anything, it's approved by a matter of law. It's simply that. At the same time, by the end of the year, we've also got to do something about an extension. We can probably do another 2-year extension because our original agreement, I think it's 1996, so we can go like 20 years. Beyond that, we should be going through another formal type of process of actually soliciting bids and everything else because we can do franchises for 20 years. So we can probably do a simple 2-year franchise extension if everybody wants to do that. But I guess this question is, at this point, is how active does the city want to get involved about holding public hearings on both these issues? Is there any type of items that the Board of Commissioners would like to discuss with Time Warner or Comcast, either one, during the next few months? Maybe about what they can help provide for us if we have shortfalls here. I would suspect that this may be an area of interest to our schools. Maybe not the TV as much, but for the internet provision. Because I think Time Warner provides their internet to most of the schools here in the city and county too. So there's quite a few issues we need to look at and get resolved over. One of them pretty quickly, 120 days will pass a lot faster than you think. And then the other ones is by the end of the year. But that, even that process could take a while if you start actually holding public hearings and sitting down and trying to negotiate with, either Time Warner or Comcast or whoever we're going to be talking to, which again may be the reason why I do another 2-year extension. We're not really sure who we're going to be talking to. But I guess, as Kevin mentioned, one of the questions is when we, and Rick will remember, when we first started doing this back in the 80s and early 90s, we used, I think I wrote them down so I remember, Miller and Holbrook or Miller and Van Eaton, or I think these guys still exist in D.C. but with different firms. But we used a D.C. firm to help us because this was also new. A few years ago, we went away from a D.C. firm because you may expect D.C. firms are real expensive. And have used a local counsel out of Lexington. That's her specialty. She specializes in tailoring in telecommunications and cable. Can I sit here and tell you today that if we retain somebody, it's going to make a whole lot of difference? I can't tell you that. This is regulated, but there's so few things. It's like code enforcement. Everybody wants us to do stuff about cable. But the federal regulations and federal laws are so strict, there's not a whole lot we can do. Right. Our hands are pretty tied in almost everything. I know the issue about the Louisville Lexington station. I think we were told a couple of years ago that they thought they might be able to talk one of the local stations into consenting to, particularly a Lexington one that didn't maybe compete for advertisers, but we never heard anything again. Particularly if it was one of BKO's sister stations, that maybe there wouldn't be an objection to that one coming in. But that's not gone anyplace either. So there's not a whole lot we can do. To be honest with you, on the transfer, the issues are going to be, is Time Warner substantially in compliance with our existing franchise, and is Comcast basically financially and technically and administratively able to take over our cable system and run it. You know, we haven't looked at anything, but Comcast is, well, are they the biggest cable company in the country now? Yeah, so it's kind of hard to say they don't have the money and the ability to run our cable company when they're probably the biggest cable company in the country. But anyway, that's kind of where we are. We've got 2 things coming up in the next few months. We just got to figure out, you know, again, if there's anything that you all want us to talk to the cable company about. You know, and we may bring, you know, may try to sit down somewhere across the table with some of them and bring in the school superintendents too. Because I know the last time when we went from Insight to Time Warner, the schools were really concerned about the internet. Whether they still have that concern or not, I don't know, but they were a couple of years ago. So at least make sure they're aware of both of these issues too. But, you know, any issues that you all have got, you know, I know some places have, you know, we'll probably, I'm not sure how successful will be, but I think some communities have been able to get money from the cable companies to, you know, help buy camera equipment and stuff to televise their meetings. You know, whether we'd be successful in asking about this stuff, I mean, I'm not sure we've really pressed it a whole lot in the past, but again, any issues like that that you hear from the citizens, from the schools, anybody else, let us know. Probably, particularly during the renewal process, it might be a good idea to have at least one public hearing. You know, either do one jointly with you and the fiscal court, or a couple both places, or whatever. But you know, at least give the opportunity for the public to come in. You know, I will tell you, most time we've done it in the past, we've advertised it, and 3 or 4 people come in and they complain about rates. And what can we do about rates? Nothing. But
Can't do anything about rates, channels, packages,
that we have
extensions.
Yeah.
Well, and one major component to all this that I think that every citizen of Bowling Green and Warren County needs to understand is that this is and has always been a non-exclusive franchise.
Thank you.
There is nothing that has ever prohibited a second operator from coming in to provide service to this community. Economics, pretty much the driving force behind that, whether that would work or not. I guess one of my main concerns about all of this would be that whatever operator is assuming the franchise would live up to the minimum standards of the current franchise.
Well, if we extend it for 2 years, they will have to.
And I would want to make sure that was done. But as Gene has pointed out, most of the rest of the negotiating parts of dealing with a cable company have pretty much gone away through federal laws and regulations. There's just not a lot that we can do.
So if that's the case, and the attorney that we're talking about hiring, what is she going to do? If we can't get a Kentucky station, we can't do anything with this, and we can't do anything with that, why are we needing to hire someone if we can't do anything?
Yeah, the only thing I can add is that she's got much more experience than Amy and I have in negotiating with the cable companies. She knows a lot of the people, although I'm not sure she knows me at Comcast because they're not here in the state. The Time Warner people, I think she's got probably a closer relationship than we do. But again, you know, Senator telling you that if we do that and spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, that we're going to get something benefit from it, I can't tell you that.
Well, if you remember, the 3 of us and who else was in the room with us, we talked to the top dog at, what was it at that time, prior to the transition now, who owned
Insight.
Yeah, Insight. And he did not say that he was going to open any new doors other than what we were already tied down with. And based on what Rick says, it's going to be the way it is, and
well, if you're okay with me, I'll give it to Amy, and then we'll do what Amy and I can. We'll see what Amy and I can do.
Okay. I'm in favor of that, but I would ask for as many things as you can think of. At least take our chances. At least ask for some things.
The only thing they do, say no.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to read through this letter that was sent to the mayor about the transfer, and just see if there's anything in there that kind of raises a red flag. Because I don't have a dog in that fight on the other side, and I'm glad I don't. So, I'd like to protect the citizens as much as I can.
If you got questions, you really give to be fine with me. Love to
Rick.
help. I think we've got questions that we put together from the last time, which seemed like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I guess it's a couple of years ago. We may want to send some of those back to this one as well.
Will you explain, as you did to me earlier, the point about, in the meeting with the top gentleman years ago, we talked about the desire of the citizens here in this community that have the respective cable packages that we wanted to have a Kentucky station. We know more about Tennessee than we do about Kentucky based on the availability of Nashville channels on our cable system. Will you explain?
Sure, be happy to. Television is divided into markets, and the Bowling Green market is served by 2 stations here who have network affiliations. That's WBKO and WNKY. WNKY has CBS and NBC. WBKO has ABC and Fox. Since they have those local stations here, those broadcast stations, there's a government regulation called market exclusivity, and they are granted market exclusivity for this television market, which means that you cannot import another broadcast network station from another market in on top of them to compete with it. The only imported station that we have now is CBS from Nashville. And the reason that we have that CBS, and we're still able to have that, is because they have significantly viewed status in this market. They still, with their off-air signal, in other words, if you stuck up rabbit ears, you could still pick that station up out of the air. Now, you may not be able to do it in all parts of Warren County, but in enough of Warren County, you can do that. So they have a grade B. They cast a grade B contour over this market, and that allows the cable company here to still continue to carry that second CBS station. But other than that, federal law prohibits or gives them the power to prohibit another station from coming in.
The local provider.
Yeah.
They can consent, but the question is why would most would? It's competition. Yeah. We do have 2 CBSs, so you're right, it's one we have.
They want to have those eyeballs. I mean, it's a business model.
Can I ask?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask Rick a question?
Sure.
If we took a really aggressive stance in our negotiation, is it possible to affect more concessions in the agreement? Or is the deck pretty well stacked that we can only affect a couple of minor areas of the agreement? What is the reality on the ground?
Well, since it's a non-exclusive agreement, I don't know that you could get much.
Okay. So thus,
and
the spending of the money for an attorney to maybe take a possible aggressive for a very small area of influence, right?
That's pretty much it. It's not like it was in the early 80s when the cable companies were aggressively offering anything they could to come in and be the one chosen to serve a community. Because even though it's a non-exclusive franchise, chances are, and they knew that when they were doing it, first in was going to win. So, you had Storer Cable here that was the first one into this market, and there's only so much room on a pole. So it almost, by default, is a pseudo-monopoly without it being a monopoly.
So hiring Lynn, for example, even if we were to take a most aggressive stance, would have little impact against the cost we would spend.
Yeah, I don't know what you'd ask for.
Okay.
Potentially get.
Okay. All right. I think that's the answer we're looking for.
That's the marching orders you wanted. So
Huh?
That's the marching orders you wanted.
I think so.
All right, we'll do it.
Okay.
We probably will set up at least one public hearing now. Give the public come in.
Not for the transfer, but for the renewal.
For renewal, at least, yeah.
Anything else from the commission?
Thanks, Rick.
All right, we'll return at 7 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in.